Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first edition of Marginalization and You, addressing inequalities in the sport industry. Our guest today with me is Dr. Ketra Armstrong. She has earned her PhD in sport management, and she is also a faculty member in the SM program who teaches 5 different upper-level SM courses. She is also previous president of the National Association for Girls and Women in Sports and a current member of the Governor's Task Force on Women in Sports. Welcome, Dr. Armstrong, to the podcast. Thank you so much for reaching out to me, and I'm super excited to talk with you today.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you for the invitation. Any opportunity to talk about the issues in sports, count me all in.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I just want to start it off at the beginning. I'm interested to hear about your start in the sport industry, and maybe if you ever felt like you were sort of out of place as a woman in the industry, and kind of how did that development work out for you? I know it was a little bit ago, but if you could just run me through that real quick, that would be perfect.
Yeah, it was a little bit ago, but it's still with me, just like it all started yesterday, And so I was a student athlete. I'm a sport enthusiast. So I played sports all of my life. As a kid, I played softball. I was a cheerleader. I did volleyball, track and field. I played tennis. I even played flag football with the guys in the neighborhood. So anything that had a ball, I was always willing to engage. So first and foremost, I was an athlete myself. And I also went to college on an athletic scholarship. So I played basketball, Division I basketball player. I also coached basketball at the Division I level, and I worked in sport administration and sport management. I worked with the SEC, the Southeastern Conference Office, doing championship and event management. I had the great fortune to work a number of bowl games. I've done research as a researcher for the Final Four. I did an economic impact study for the NCAA Women's Final Four, trying to see how much money they were generating for the local communities. I've done economic impact studies for historically Black college sport events to look at the monies they were generating for their respective communities. I've been really, really blessed. I did a seminar for the Ghana Olympic Committee in Ghana, Africa. I met with the Cape Town Olympic Bid Committee in South Africa. I had the great fortune to develop a sport management program in the Caribbean. So sport has been good to me. It has given me great opportunities, both nationally, internationally, locally. And I've also worked at the youth level. I started a program, Youth Sports and Culture, back in my hometown of Mississippi. For one summer, I got a chance to use sport as a positive alternative for the kids who lived in the economically challenged area, to give them a positive alternative to drugs and gangs and all those things that we don't want them to be engaged in. So I've worked in community sports. I've worked in at the collegiate level. I've had a chance to be a consultant with the professional sports. I've done the consumer analysis for the NHL. I've been truly blessed, honestly. Like, I've done all that I wanted to do in the sport industry. So you asked me how it started. Is because I had a love for sports. I was an athlete. And so it was just inherent that I still wanted to be in this industry because that's what I enjoyed doing as a student athlete. And so after my years as a student athlete, then I went and got my graduate degree, got my master's from Mississippi State University, got my PhD from the Ohio State University. But I've never been a Buckeye. I've always been a Michigan fan. And so for me, I've just had a great opportunity. So when I stopped working in the industry, I wanted to come into the academy because I had a great experience. So now I spend my time trying to prepare students about the ins and outs and teaching them the nuances of the industry so they can make it better, so they can make it better. So the other part of your question, have I ever felt like I was out of place? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. That part of the athlete in me, I think it just makes me believe that wherever I am, I'm meant to be. And wherever I am, I'm there for a purpose. And I also just believe in the skills that I have to do whatever it is. See, I believe that when you prepare yourself and you do the things that you can do to influence your destiny, I think that kind of happens. People say luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. So I've been prepared. And I think being a student athlete made me be prepared. I practice, I train. And so whatever it is, whatever is before me, I still practice, I still train. Now I just practice and train differently. I read a lot. I've been able to observe a lot. And so, no, I've never felt that I didn't belong in the industry. Now, there were people who questioned my belonging in the
Yeah.
industry, right? Like I know that there would be times I go places. I remember when I was working in the Southeastern Conference, and I remember going down to this place as one of our championship and events. They were hosting one of our championships and events. And I walked into the place, and the last person that they were expecting to walk in representing the conference was a Black woman. I know it. I could see it written all over their faces, right? And I actually called them out on it in a nice way. So there have been times that I've surprised people. They didn't expect to see me, but it never surprised me because the things that I've done have been intentional. So I never felt that I belonged. I'm not telling you that there weren't challenges, but if there were, I don't know if I realized them at the time. Honestly, I learned a long time ago, no one can make you feel inferior without your permission.
Yeah.
I mean, Eleanor Roosevelt was credited for saying it, but my mom told me that a long time ago because I'm from Mississippi. And my mom told me, listen, you prepare yourself, you do the best you can, and no one's going to be able to stop you because of your race, because of your class, because of your gender and all of that. And I believed it. So honestly, I just had this mindset, just like I did when I was an athlete. I'm in this game, I'm in it to win it. And that's how I felt about my profession. And I really think that's why I've had such a great time in the industry, is because I wasn't going to let my experiences be defined by others. So I didn't feel some of the marginalization that some women feel, some Black people feel, Black women feel. I didn't really feel that. People respected, I think they respected, number one, my willingness to work hard. I think they respected my preparation. And I think they respected my skills that transfer from being an athlete to being a leader. And so and I know I'm giving you a very scenic version, but as you can tell,
that's great.
I'm passionate about this. Yeah, I'm passionate about this topic. Absolutely. But I just think that, and that's what I try to tell my students, don't go in apologizing for being there. Wherever you are, be there fully, be in the moment. And then I think I really believe you teach people how to treat you. And so people learned early on that I wasn't the type of person that they could say whatever they wanted to, that I could treat them, that they could treat anyway. And I honestly, I'm not saying that there weren't challenges, but I didn't feel some of the marginalization, and my experiences were vastly different from some others. It's because I believe of the attitude that I brought to the process. I believed I belonged, I acted like I belonged, and people treated me like I belonged. Yeah. Even though I get funny stares sometimes. I tell you, I know they were surprised, but that was their problem, not mine.
Yeah. So the two things that stand out to me there, number one is the confidence. Hearing about that, that's great. And then anything to do in the industry, I like what you said, is don't ever apologize for being there, because I've been in a lot of places where, I don't know, I feel a little bit not as confident as maybe some of the other people coming from a small town. Not a lot of people from my high school go to like a big university like this. So having that confidence and the belief in yourself is something that's great to hear. And then number two, also like the humility piece and giving back to the industry that's given you so much. That's great to hear. And I thank you so much for that answer. That was a great start. And then beyond that, I'm kind of interested. It's a little bit of a broad question. There are a lot of different avenues that you could take here, but I'm interested your take on the current climate in professional sports in terms of marginalization. And do you believe there to be a lot of like misogynistic setups and like pitfalls in the organization? And then possibly beyond that, where do you feel are the places that you can attack and possibly start to address sort of solutions? I know it's like super broad, but just your original thoughts on that, I'd be interested to hear.
I think, yes, I do think that there are problems in the industry. Any industry that is based on capitalism, where the profit and the bottom line, you're going to find oftentimes some marginalization because certain people are perceived to be expendable. They're expendable, right? And when you have an environment like that, there's a hierarchy where certain talents are valued more than others. For oftentimes for reasons that have nothing to do with talent, but it has everything to do with connections. The sport industry is an industry of networks. It's an industry of connections. And a lot of time, it's really not about what you know, and it's not even about who you know. It's about who knows you.
Yeah.
And those are the things that I think we see in the industry. So number one, it's cliquish. Oftentimes it's cliquish. That's why skills are important. That's why having the expertise and the qualifications are important, because it's going to help you get through the cliques. right? For the most part. But the other part of it is the sport industry is a very male-centric industry. We know sport is the place where boys became men. So men in sports are always celebrated, right? And so for women who want to be in this game, they're subject to the misogyny, the discrimination, the challenges. See, it's really interesting because even though I was a basketball player in college, I don't know if I said this, but I played basketball in college. I think I did. I was a basketball player in college. I coached basketball in college. I worked in sports. I worked a lot of different sports. But it's interesting that football is my favorite sport. I love football, absolutely love it. My father coached football, and I just love football. And so because I love football and I could talk football with the guys, it gave me a level of credibility that maybe other women didn't have. So one of the challenges that many women experience when it comes to the sport industry, they have to prove that they know it. They have to prove they understand sports, right? And I remember sometimes even when I was teaching, I used to teach principles of marketing, and I could see students really wanting to know what I knew. So I would drop in a little nugget about when I worked in the SEC office and we did this sponsorship for Gillette, or when I worked the Sugar Bowl and we did this. So I had to kind of drop a little knowledge to let them know I got street cred. I got street cred. I know what I'm talking about. I'm not telling you something I read in a book. You know, I'm telling you something I've lived. I've been on the streets in the industry. I know what's happening in the real world. And a lot of professors don't. They don't know what's in the real world. They're all of their experiences through what they've read in a book. I tell them what I lived and what I know. But the unfortunate part is I'm certain that some guys don't have to do that. People assume that guys in sports know sports and understand sports and understand the business of sport. So they get there's an unfair pass that many guys get, that many men get, that the women don't get. And so, yes, it's an industry because it's a sports is considered masculine for the most part. And the business of sport is, the numbers tell us that white men dominate the leadership positions in sport. So if you're not white and you're not a man, you have challenges. And if you're a Black woman at the intersection of race and gender and class, you could really have challenges. So yes, there's been an ebb and flow in the industry. I think there was a time where things were getting better. And then I think what we realize is that, no, things haven't really gotten better, is that we've adjusted to the things. The conditions, I don't think hadn't changed very much, but I think people in the industry adjusted. What we're seeing now with the racial reckoning that's before us, we're seeing student athletes and coaches requiring their organizations to do better. So now we're seeing the highlights of the misogyny and the racism and other forms of discrimination that's happening in professional sports, that's happening in college sports, that's even happening in high school sports. And so, yes, there are problems in the industry, but it's not unique to sport. There are problems in other industries, but it is kind of unique to sport in that it's such a male reserve, it's such a male preserve, right? And so women trying to get in this landscape, it is often a challenge. And so, number one, we have to call it out. We have to call out the problem. See, a lot of times people don't want to talk about the challenges in sport because sport is our safe space, man. It's where we go to hang out and forget about the problems of the world. So people don't want to talk about the problems, the sexism and the racism and the homophobia in sport, because sport is the thing we all love. It's the thing that brings us together. It's our escape from the problem. So don't bring the problems into our escape, right? So people don't want to talk about it, but now we have to. So to solve the problem, we have to name the problem. And I think that's the first step, is having students to understand, to look at sport critically and to understand where the challenges are, to understand where the problems are. Because once we can name them, we got some bright minds, like students like you who are pursuing this industry. We need your mind, we need your intellect to help us make this industry better, but we can't change it until we name it. And we have to name the issues first. And I think we're doing better now. At least like in my classes, I love my students. We have so much fun in our class because we're calling it out. We're talking about things. And I can see in their minds their learning. I can see their growth, and I can see how now they're bringing a critical lens to this industry, and things that they would have just accepted or not even recognized, they're calling it out. And so that does my heart good. That's why, again, that's why I got into this business of teaching, is because I enjoy sports, but we can do better. And I think when you know better, you should do better. So that's what we're trying to do.
So I was going to mention this a little. I wasn't sure whether to bring it up and like how the best way to bring it up, but I think you mentioned it. How would you characterize sort of like the intersection between the race piece and the gender piece, and sort of like how do you navigate that? Because I was going to bring it up, but I wasn't sure the best way to do it, but you did. So I'm kind of interested to hear your take on that.
Yeah, it is really it's a, how do I want to describe it? It's a challenging phenomenon.
Yeah.
Let's say that, because there's no escape. There's no escape, and there's no individual route through one part of the intersection. So, for example, I am a Black woman, so I'm dealing with race and gender simultaneously, like it's at the same time. And generally it happens at the same time. However, there are times when comments can be just flat out racist. So I feel that. But there are comments that are flat out sexist, and I feel that. But then there's but most of the times they happen simultaneously. A lot of times when women of color are discriminated against, it's not expressly because of their race, because of their gender, right? But they just know, and the numbers tell us, if you look at the number of Black women who are in sport management, sport leadership, it's far less than the number of white women. It's far less than the number of Black men, and it's far less than the number of white men. So just by deduction, it tells us that there's some intersectional discrimination going on. But oftentimes it's subtle. It's not expressed, right? But we see it in the numbers. And so, honestly, I will tell you, for me, I don't try to navigate the race part or the gender part. Like I mentioned before, I just navigate what I need to do to be there. Because sometimes it's hard to identify what's the source of why Black women aren't, more profoundly present in the industry. And so, it goes back to the same things. I mean, a woman or a person of color still has to know the industry. There's still a knowledge base that's required. There's still networking that's needed. So you still have to meet people. People have to know you. You have to know people. But it's really about understanding the business and understanding how to create relations. But I still think fundamentally, like I mentioned at the beginning, and you talked about it, it's a feeling that you belong. And sometimes you have to make your belonging. You know what I mean by that? Sometimes when you go into a space, you just have to stake your claim and say, listen, I am here, like it or not, I am here. And that's a part of it, is again, going in with the confidence that you belong. Because if you go in not feeling that you belong, most of the environments will affirm that. If you go in thinking, well, I don't belong here, trust me, they're going to treat you like you don't belong there.
Absolutely.
And that's what happens. And so I think it's a combination of things. It's the individual confidence that people have to bring, the people of color, women, Black women, other Asian women, women of Hispanic descent, women of Native ancestry, all of them. So there is an individual component. But what I try to get my students to do, and what I'm spending time doing now, is looking at the institutional responsibility, the organizational responsibility. Like, we can't keep expecting, Black women and people of color to try to have all of these psychological strategies to try to fit into a toxic environment, which is what's been happening. Is that, people who feel that they're marginalized in a place, they develop psychological strategies to deflect the attacks on who they are. They develop strategies to feel a sense of purpose. So they do all of this strategic psychological navigating. What I think needs to happen is the organizations need to change their culture. So such navigation is not required to such an extent by women and by people of color. That's what has to change, is the organizational culture. And we're seeing some of that. Like I'm actually pleased with the attempts that I see some sport organizations make. We're still a long way from where we need to be, but I can see the progress. Even though it's incremental, I can see the progress.
That's a super interesting take. I didn't think to look at it from that perspective, and I'm super That it's just like a powerful answer, and I'm super excited to hear that. So thank you for that. Just want to switch gears a little bit and make sure that I mention this. I'd really like to talk about your previous roles in the industry, specifically your previous time spent as the president of the National Association for Girls and Women in Sport, and also your current role as a member of the governor's task force on the women in sports, specifically in the state of Michigan, and the governor's attempt to make sure to address this inequality. And yeah, everything having to do with that, I'd be super interested to hear about.
Yeah, I began my work with the National Association for Girls and Women in Sport, which at the time was the oldest organization dedicated to girls and women in sport in every capacity: participation, coaching, leadership, media, in the whole gamut of sport. That's what the organization was designed to do. I started as the vice president for marketing. That's kind of how it started. In my first, I was a member. And then I became a vice president for marketing and was able to get a sponsorship to provide opportunities for many of our members throughout the nation. And then years later, I actually became the president of the association. And again, our focus was gender equity, gender equality, providing girls and women with the full scope of opportunities in every domain of sport: coaching, officiating, media, everything, participation, all of that. And that was very rewarding. One of the things that was really exciting when I was in that capacity is our organization owns the Wade Trophy. Many people consider the Wade Trophy the equivalent of the Heisman, but the Wade Trophy is given to the most outstanding female basketball student athlete. And so it's, basketball is one of the premier sports for women. We don't have football. There's not football for women. So there's not an equivalent. So basketball was like the hallmark sport. And so our organization owned the Wade Trophy. And it was really unique because each year, my presidency, I'd get a chance to go to the Women's Final Four and present the Wade Trophy to the winner. It was a big deal. It was a lot of fun. But it was just a way of celebrating what girls and women have done in sport. And that's what that entity was designed to do. And so we would have a conference, we would offer materials, we published a booklet, we had just a number of different artifacts to, number one, encourage girls and women to be involved in sport. And then secondly, to support girls and women who were involved in sport. In my capacity, I remember meeting with people in Congress, talking about legislation that we needed for girls and women in sport. Again, just trying to change the macro level culture to support girls and women in sport in every domain. So we did a lot with Title IX, trying to really help people to understand Title IX. So we had a lot of resources about Title IX and really trying to get to more enforcement. I mean, Title IX was enacted in 1972, and we still have entities that are not in compliance because it's not treated as a law. It's treated as a nice suggestion of what you should do, not a requirement of what you must do. So we spent a lot of time in advocacy, advocating for Title IX enforcement, advocating for gender equity, advocating for equality for men and women in every aspect of sport, for girls and women in every aspect of sport. So that was a really, really unique leadership opportunity. Being a leader of a national association, it was really a special part of my purpose that I didn't even realize, but it became a part of my purpose, but it was organic. Remember, I was an athlete. Yeah. And so fighting for athletes, and remember, I was a coach. So fighting for coaches, was something that I really enjoyed. And then the thing I did mention to you, I did some freelance broadcasting. I love talking about sports. And so for a little while, I did some freelance broadcasting of just talking about issues of sports. And so being in that role as the president of the association, I got to fight for people who were coming after me. I got to fight for the legacy to maintain for people who have come before me. So it was a great opportunity. Shifting gears, that was a long time ago. So shifting gears now, more recently, I'm working with the task force for the Michigan Task Force for Women in Sport. And, it's just so dynamic. It's so unique. It's one of the only ones that we know in the country where a governor's office is sponsoring a task force to really do a deep dive onto women in sport. Most government offices don't care enough about women's sports. It's not totally surprising if you know that our governor, Gretchen Whitmer, she's committed to equality in every domain, but she was also a high school athlete back in her day. So she knows the role of athletics. And, research tells us that many women who are Fortune 5 company leaders attribute their leadership to success to having been an athlete at some capacity, high school, college, or otherwise. And so we know, I mean, people in the industry know, people outside of sport, people in different domains, they know how the skills that you learn in sports are transferable to every domain in life. Absolutely. So the governor convened a task force. And so my role on the task force, I was leading the research to explore what were the experiences like for women who are leaders in the state of Michigan. And I'm sad to say that their experience is not as positive as some of the men. However, I'm proud to say that they're enjoying what they're doing. They're dedicated women who are dedicated to leading and dedicated to providing better opportunities for girls and women throughout the state of Michigan. So it really provided some unique insight. And so we now have data in which we can try to develop policies and practices that can really make a difference. So the first step was gathering data to get the information. What are their experiences? What are the barriers they're facing? Those kinds of things. And then once we get that information, which we've obtained, now we're in the phase of, now what can we do? How can we make a difference? What kind of policies and practices can be implemented to really improve the opportunities and experiences for girls and women in sports? So that's kind of where we are. And so those two big buckets of my involvement have been very, very enriching, and have given me a unique sense of purpose.
That's great to hear. And then just switching gears a little bit, I kind of want to hear, I think you touched on it just a bit, about on the other side of the spectrum with male fans and athletes. I'm interested to hear about how anyone involved with sports on the male side can sort of aid the female athletes in the struggle for equality. Like what can you do sort of to help in that struggle?
First and foremost, women's sports need male allies. We need boys and men to support women's sports. Just like women and girls support men's and boys sports, we need it to be reciprocated. And so we really need for fathers to get out and take their little girls to see women's sports so that they can see role models, so they can see people who look like them, so that they can have an aspirational vision of where they can be and what they can do. We need dads to get their daughters involved. But we also need dads to speak up when they're in circles with other boys and men. You know, when boys are just sitting around talking, it's important for boys to also be advocate for girls and women in sports. So we need them. One of the factors I think contributed to Title IX success, and Title IX is a story of good news, bad news. It was good in that it helped participation and it really gave some cultural legitimacy to girls and women in sport. But the downside was that it also resulted in a loss of opportunities for women in the leadership capacity. So Title IX was sort of a good news, bad news. But one of the reasons that Title IX was effective is that men got involved. There were men who were advocates because men realized that they wanted their daughters to have opportunities. If you think of, if you're a parent, you have a daughter and a son, you don't want your daughter, just by nature of her sex, her gender, to be marginalized. And so fathers started to realize the impact that it could have on their daughters. Brothers started to realize the impact that it had on their sisters. And that's when it changed, when the struggle became personalized, when men and boys started to realize that it affects my sister, it could affect my mother, it could affect my auntie, it could affect my daughters and their daughters. That's when it became a human issue. Not a sports issue, but a human issue. That's when I think we start to see change. So some of the great advocates for women's sports have been men. Even on the governor's task force for women in sport, they're men who are allies. They're men who are also supporting this charge. Even in the research that we conducted, there were men who saying, yes, we realize that it's been a struggle and we're going to do what we can to make it better. So what can you do? You can be an advocate for girls and women in sport. When people are trivializing women, when you see a woman refereeing in the NFL, or you see a woman officiating in the NBA, if you hear some of those sly remarks, challenge them. Stand up for them. Be an advocate for women to have just as much opportunity to participate in sports in general, including men's sports. Because what I find interesting is that we don't balk about men working in women's sports, Men
Yeah.
are coaching women's sports
Yeah.
and we don't say anything about it. Men officiate women's sports, we don't say anything about it, right? But oftentimes when it's reversed, when women want to coach men's sports or women want to officiate men's sports, we make it harder for them, like they're not qualified. And so what boys and men can do is be advocates, is to challenge that gender ideology that allows people to make those snippet remarks about women in sports. You know, that's how it changes, because you change the world one mind at a time. So if you change all of your friends and they change their friends and then they change their friends, we got a revolution. That's how we change it, you know, because enough people are doing small things that ultimately create a big impact. It's like, trust me, a ripple makes a difference. A ripple eventually turns into a wave. Okay. And that's what we need, enough of the ripples to create some waves of social change for girls and women in sport. That's how it happens.
Personalizing that struggle is the big piece that I took from that. And
It is.
those are great tips. And thank you for that. Quickly, just to wrap up, that this can be a tough one to answer, but I'm kind of just wondering, what do you think the bottom line is coming up in the future? What would you say is the bottom line to address the inequality and to sort of combat the marginalization? What would you say, like a short answer to this question?
I got one word: accountability.
Perfect.
Accountability. Once we identify issues and we put policies and practices in place, if there's no accountability and transparency, it's not going to change. So when I say accountability, it encompasses a lot of things. So number one, having people to report on what they're doing, you know, pulling back the covers to kind of see what's going on. And so it's really accountability, as simple as that. When people talk about the underrepresentation of women in sports, we should have these companies to talk about, well, what are you doing? What are you doing to make it better? And if they're not doing enough, we have to challenge them to be accountable to do better, right? So it honestly is really one word. Everybody knows that it's not right to marginalize people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody knows it's not right to treat people poorly. We all know this,
Yeah.
right? We learned this in kindergarten. What do you mean? Treat people like you want to be treated. But now we know we need to treat people like they want to be treated, right? So what's the solution? I tell you what the solution is, Riley. It's accountability. It's holding people accountable to do better. The more we look the other way, the more we let them make excuses for why they're not doing better, the more they're going to do it. Accountability is the solution.
Dr. Armstrong, thank you so much for joining the podcast. This has been great to hear. I think you really are the perfect person to talk to about this. Every one of my questions was answered, and now I have strategies moving forward. So I just want to thank you so much for all your energy. I can just feel it through the screen. Thank you so much for reaching back out. Thank you so much for being here. I know you have a super busy schedule.
Hey, listen, Riley, I'm never too busy to talk to the next generation about what we need to do to make this industry that we all love to make it better. So thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. And I wish you well. And let me just say, it's not lost on me that I'm talking to a dude about girls and women's sports. So thank you for the consciousness to even want to explore this topic. I really appreciate it. And just know that this is what we need. People like you helping us to solve this issue. So thank you for the opportunity and best of luck to you.
You as well. Thank you so much, Dr. Armstrong. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You as well.